Ted's Caving Journal. Let's see if I can finish this off. April 28, 2001. In this journal entry, I discussed briefly the feelings B and I had at this point. I like to elaborate on those feelings and set the mood for this part of the journal. I hope I can successfully convey our exact thoughts and feelings as we contemplated our next move. If not, I'm afraid we will appear to the average reader as being ignorant, naive, or downright foolish. This cave represented to us the culmination of weeks of hard work, complete with an array of emotions. From fatigue to fear, anticipation to pain, from frustration to glory. To us, we were not standing on the brink of possible destruction, but rather honoring an unspoken commitment. Much like a parent of a wayward child, we were not about to abandon our child out of fear of the unknown. Like it or not, this cave had become a part of us, and now we must see this venture to its fruition. Additionally, verbose explanation aside, we were being eaten alive with curiosity. Despite the overwhelming number of unexplained occurrences we experienced, we had to go back to this cave. What was making the rumbling noise? What caused the change in wind strength? Etc., all the way down to Joe. What could have possibly happened to him? What did he see or experience? We had many lengthy discussions about what our next move would be. We kept coming to the same conclusion. We had to return to that cave. We could offer no possible scenario that would solve the many riddles held deep within it. The only way we could hope to complete the puzzle would be to conquer the cave. We were going back to the mystery cave.
2 weeks after our trip with Joe, and we were on our way back to the cave. To prepare for this trip, we contacted the local cave rescue group and got permission to borrow their low-wattage two-way phone. The phone consists of 2 transceivers and a long spool of thin wire. I would then be able to unwind the wire as I went inside the passage and stay in contact with B the entire time. We thought it would be a good idea to take a video camera into the new passage. I purchased a case that would protect the video camera from dust as well as sharp rocks. I was more than willing to pay the cost of the case just to make sure B get to see the entire passage. My head was doing fine. I still had a light red line to mark the spot where I tried to break the rock with my head. I never went to a doctor, but it was a very painful experience. I have thought about what would happen if I'd been able to go into the passage with Joe. He was a changed man after he came out. I've been calling his house nearly every day trying to talk to him, but he won't answer his phone. B called his work, and a mutual friend told him Joe called in sick 2 weeks ago and hasn't been since. He said Joe warned his boss he might be out for a while. I even stopped by his house twice. The first time it looked like someone was home, but no one answered the door. The second time his car was gone and there were no lights on. I hoped to talk to him before this trip, but it didn't work out. As we were rigging up the road to descend to the cave, I felt something for the first time. I did not want to go in. It was not a feeling of foreboding. I was not receiving some premonition. I just had no desire to enter the underground world of the mystery cave. I did not share this feeling with B at that time. Even though I had no desire to go into the cave, I knew we had to. So I double-checked my gear and slipped over the edge of the cliff. Right from the beginning, it seemed like the cave did not want to be there. Nothing went smoothly. Every time we tried to clip a carabiner or tie a knot or attach something to the rope, we had to do it 2 or 3 times to get it right. Fortunately, we recognized this and made sure everything was safe and secure. As we slowly made our way down, we were continually bumping into the side of the cave, stumbling as we walked, or dropping things. We finally reached a point where we stopped to gather ourselves before continuing. Our load was relatively light, but we were taking forever to get to the hole. Finally, we made it. We checked the camera and phone to make sure they survived the trip. We tested everything and I have gathered the gear I wanted to take into the passage. Then it was time. We looked at each other but said nothing. Then I turned to face the passage. As I twisted my body to begin entering the tomb, I desperately hoped it would be the last time I would contort my body to enter this claustrophobic nightmare. The trip through Floyd's tomb went smoothly, figuratively speaking. After I got through, we took several minutes to get everything passed through to me. I got suited up and tested all the equipment. The phone worked like a charm. I videotaped the squeeze and then the first section of the new passage. Since I would be unable to tape while I crawled, my plan was to crawl to the next section, then stop and film some more. I could video what I'd just been through, and then video what I was going to crawl through next. That way I could get each section from both ends. I was starting to feel pretty good about the trip. I felt a sense of personal satisfaction at the beginning to provide a way for B to see the fruits of his labor. It was awkward lugging the camera and unrolling the phone wire while trying to crawl. I knew it would be worth it though. The small formations were too small to show up on the video. With normal outside lighting, it would be no problem. But with my headlight as the only source of light, that effort was futile. The cluster formations turned out quite nice. They were easily large enough and made for some pretty good footage. I took advantage of the film stop to check the phone. It was comforting to hear someone's voice deep within the passage. We chatted briefly and then I unplugged the phone and prepared to continue. The phone resembled an oversized regular phone, more like the ones you would see in war movies. When I wanted to talk to B, I would just plug the phone into a special jack at the spool of wire. The power source was on B's end of the phone, so it was always turned on. The reception was as clear as a normal phone. I continued forward. Even though progress was slow, it was steady. Things were going pretty good until I reached the round rock. Once again, I got a strange feeling just like last time. I looked around carefully but saw nothing to be alarmed about. I proceeded to film the entire room. I got good shots of the round rock from all angles. Got the walls, ceiling, and the floor to the best of my ability. I even got some pretty good tape of the figure on the wall. It was difficult to make out exactly what it was on the video, but you could definitely tell something was there. After I taped everything to my satisfaction, I moved towards the end of the room to prepare to explore new territory. At the far end of the large room was a passage that led to darkness. The entrance was about a foot lower than my head, and it looked like it continued at that height for as far back as I could see. I ducked under the ceiling and prepared to see new sights. The walls in the new passage were darker than the rest of the cave to this point. The floor was made up of the same type of broken rocks. The ceiling had the same type of near-perfect arch as in the older section of the mystery cave. It almost seemed out of place in the jagged atmosphere of a cave. I could only see back about 300 feet or so when the passage appeared to make a right-hand turn. I thought this would be a good place to check in with B. It took a couple of beeps before he answered the phone, but once he did, his voice was still crystal clear. It sounded like he might have been snoozing. Had I been gone that long? He said he was doing fine and that I could take as much time as I could. I thanked him and hung up. His patience had been wonderful during this whole project. He spent nearly a lot of time just waiting for me while I explored the passage. I was glad he was still willing to sit and wait. I hung up the phone and started to film the new passage, and then it happened. From behind me, I heard the scraping noise. Behind me! It was so loud. It was close. It was coming from the large room I just left. I wheeled around to face whatever had made the noise. When I did, I lost my presence of mind and stood up at the same time. Crunch! My helmet crashed into the passage ceiling. My light broke, and I was buried in heavy darkness. Pain shot through my neck and down into my back. The helmet had protected my head, while my neck was nearly numb from the impact. Fear enveloped me, and my knees began to weaken. I slowly and involuntarily slumped to my knees. I gently set the camera down as I began to see stars from the pain in my upper back. The scraping noise lasted only a second, and now the only sound I could hear was my own panic-induced breathing. Not only could I feel the fear thick upon my chest, but the darkness seemed to hold me in place. I felt like I was vulnerable from every direction. I wanted to turn and look behind me, and to the side of me, and to the front of me. Everywhere I looked, I saw black. Finally, I broke the stupor of terror long enough to reach for an alternate light source, the mini-mag on my helmet. I twisted the light to turn it on, and when I did, I nearly cried. I had forgot to put fresh batteries in, and now I could barely see more than a few feet. It was better than nothing. I immediately began shining the light with all my might into the large room. I strained to get a glimpse of any movement in the room. Nothing. I was shaking violently as I sat there trying to figure out what to do. My mind was not thinking clearly. I honestly thought I was going to die right there in the cave. For a fleeting moment, I wondered how B would even figure out what had happened to him. Then it hit me like a boulder. The phone! My mind must have been clearing up at that point because I thought about my glow sticks. Without taking my eyes off the large room, I felt around my backpack for the glow sticks.
Since I was carrying the phone and video camera, I removed as much as possible from my pack, and one of the things I left with B was backup headlamps. Thus, I was left with only glow sticks.
I found one and ripped it out of the package. I could tell something was wrong by how it sounded. It had been inadvertently broken and was now useless. I chucked it on the ground and searched my pack for another one. I took my eyes off the large room, only to check the passage behind me occasionally. I found another glow stick, broke it to light it up. The soft green glow created eerie colors on the walls of the cave. The stick provides barely enough light to see the immediate area, and provided no hint of what lay ahead. I felt the pack for more light, again without taking my eyes off the room. I felt a third glow stick and ripped it out of the package. After breaking it to make sure it worked, I hesitated, then threw the glow stick into the large room. The throw was a perfect one, and the stick sailed through the length of the room. In the brief moment that the light traveled through the room, I saw nothing but cave walls. The absence of anything unusual did nothing to ease my state of panic. At the far end of the room, I got a brief glimpse of the round rock as the light bounced on it. Then the light went behind the rock and it seemed to disappear. I was still shaking, but at least I didn't see anything. Still, there was the noise. I used the glow stick to light the phone reel, and with fumbling fingers I managed to plug my phone into the jack. I put the phone to my ear and heard nothing. The usual beeps to indicate connection with the other phone was not there. Terrified, I pulled the phone from the jack and reinserted it. Again, silence. The line was dead. What could have happened? I just talked to B. I found myself nearly sobbing with fear. I knew the only way out of here was back the way I came, but something was there. A third attempt at making contact with B met with the same results. I tried to think of another plan, but I could only focus on the memories of the grinding sound that I heard. In my weakened state, I slumped against the side of the passage, breathing like I have just finished a race, never breaking eye contact with the shadows of the large room. As my shoulder touched the wall, I had a powerful jolt of pain, reminding me of the collision with the roof of the cave. Despair, agony, terror. Can't say exactly how long I sat there, but my feet were tingling and my knees were sore. The pain in my back crept lower, although my neck felt no different. I resolved to make an attempt to exit the evil passage. I knew if I waited too long, I would have lost what little light I had. I attempted to stand, but did not have the strength. I crawled slowly to the near end of the large room, dragging my pack beside me. Using the walls of the cave, I was able to slowly stand, though not straight due to my sore back. Still breathing rapidly, I slowly advanced through the room. I wound up the phone wire as I went. My eyes were staring straight ahead, straining for any signs of movement. With every step, my light would cast ever-changing shadows on the wall, keeping me busy trying to look at everyone. My eyes burned as I realized I hadn't blinked for many minutes. How many? How long had this been going on? The only sounds I could hear were the crunch of my feet on the broken rock and the wheezing of my breath. As I wound the cord, I could hear the squeak of the wheel with each turn, bringing me closer to the tomb, closer to B, and closer to safety. The short trip through the room took an eternity. As I passed the crude drawing, it seemed to glow as if offering me some warning. I didn't know what the drawing represented, but everything about this cave seemed to instill fear. Towards the far end of the room, I could see the round rock dimly at the far reaches of my light. Something seemed different about it, but I couldn't tell what. When I got within a few feet, I could finally tell what changed. It moved. That was the sound I heard. Again, terror gripped my entire body as I realized how close I was to something. I had no choice but to continue. Still, it was not easy. I inched towards the rock, holding the glow stick ahead of me in my shaking hand, using it to pierce the darkness. I stopped just to the side of the rock and wound up the slack on the phone wire. Then I realized why I lost contact with B. The rock was now sitting on the wire. I gave it a tug, and the thin wire snapped. My only hope of contacting with the outside world ceased to exist when that wire broke. I've never felt so alone and helpless, buried deep within the earth. I had voluntarily descended into my own grave with a casket of solid rock. With the phone now useless, I set it down on the passage. My gaze fixed on the round rock, I proceeded forward. My breathing was rapid, with my throat dry and aching, and my mouth dusty. With every crunch of the rock below my feet, my heart seemed to stop. No movement could be seen in the green glow of my stick. I got to the rock and peered over the top. Seeing nothing, I took several rapid steps past it. When I reached the other side, I recoiled in horror at what I saw. In the side of the passage near the floor, there was a hole, with another passage revealed. It had been covered by the rock, but now it was exposed. The rock could not have moved by itself. I backed away from the hole and collided with the opposite wall. I had not been paying attention to the pain in my back, but now it came back to me in all its fury. I stared down the newly discovered passage. It went down at a 45-degree angle and continued straight for as far as I could see. Several feet down, I could see the glow stick that I'd thrown. It illuminated the passage enough that I could tell the walls were fairly smooth. The floor seemed to be in the same way, unlike the rest of the cave. The passage was about 3 feet in diameter as far as I could see. It would have been an easy passage to explore if I at least desired to do so. Right now, I wanted out of that cave and into daylight. I slowly back away from the hole towards the bee. I never took my eyes off the abyss. I nearly tripped over the phone wire as I turned to leave this devil's lair. I noticed my mini-mag was practically dead, leaving me with only a glow stick. I wanted to sprint to Floyd's tomb. Just hearing another human being would help alleviate some of the fear I was experiencing. As I turned away from the large rock in the hole, I felt an overwhelming sense of panic fill my soul. It felt like a legion of demons was about to attack me from behind. I feel like my salvation lay ahead of me in the darkness, and Lucifer was behind me, trying to keep me from safety. I found myself moving much faster than I should have been in that cave. My only thought was to get out as quickly as possible. I passed the crystal formation, barely even noticing this beautiful creation of nature in the green glow of my light. Every time I ducked to avoid a rock, I felt my back scream that it's injured. It's a reminder of my injury. When I got to the point in the passage where I had to crawl, I flung myself down on all fours, barely slowing down as I dropped. When my hands came in contact with the cave floor, I felt an electric shock shoot all the way down my back and simultaneously down my arms. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, I let out a scream. I crumpled down and lay there on the rock, with new levels of pain manifesting every time I inhaled. Whimpering from fear and pain, I tried to listen to any other noise in the cave. I could feel the silence pounding in my head. I knew from previous trips that B was still out of earshot, but I was close. Forcing myself to move, I winced as I pulled my body onto all fours and started to progress along the cave. I still held the glow stick in my hand, but I have ceased checking behind me. Now my focus was ahead of me. I reached a point where I could yell to B, but I didn't make a sound. I didn't want to stop long enough to talk. Finally, I reached the last stretch of cave before the squeeze. As I was crawling towards the beginning of the tomb, I called to B. He answered back. I screamed to him to get everything ready to go. He asked if I was okay, since he hadn't heard from me on the phone. He got worried. I told him no and to get everything ready to go. When I reached the rope, I flipped off my helmet and shoved it into my pack. For the first time I realized I'd forgotten the video camera. It was a fleeting thought. I cared no more about that camera than a passenger of the Titanic cared about a hat or a coat. I tied that pack to the rope and told him to pull it through. Then I told him to start heading towards the surface as soon as he pulled the rope through. He asked why, and I screamed that there was something in the cave with us. My back ached with every move I make. I knew it didn't matter. I was going to get through the tomb as fast as I could, injuries notwithstanding. Just as I started into the squeeze, I felt the wind of the passage increase, and with the most nauseating stench I have ever experienced. It smelled like damp, rotting, rancid, putrid death. I almost started to dry heave. I pulled up my shirt over my nose to shield me from that overpowering smell. At that point, B smelled it too, yelling, "What is that?" Then he yelled at me to hurry up and get through. I told him I was coming. Then I took a deep breath through my shirt and started back through. B's yelling had intensified my fear and panic as if I needed any help. I knew he could sense the urgency to getting out of this place. Still, as I worked my way through, I yelled at him to start up, that I would catch up with him where I got through. He said he would. He placed my glow stick inside the passage, then began to climb out. This time, through the squeeze, I have no regard for the tightness of the passage. I was scraping my face, my ears, my arms, my shoulders. Every inch of the squeeze meant numerous scratches on my body, but I barely noticed them. My back was nearly paralyzing me with pain, but once again I felt the rising need to vomit because of the odor being delivered to my nostrils by the breeze. Halfway through Floyd's tomb, I took a break to catch my breath. I was approaching exhaustion, and my respiration rate was through the roof. The top of the passage seemed to rest my cheek, and the floor felt like broken glass on my opposite cheek. As I paused briefly to recuperate, I heard the scraping noise coming from deep within this cave. It continued for several seconds, then silence. I let out a cry, which startled me. I was no longer consciously reacting to the noise. The cry was a subconscious response to the fear which flowed through my entire body. In a panic, I began to scoot through the passage. As I reached the largest part of the tomb, I quickly slid my arms under my body to get into position to exit through the hole. I grabbed the rope and pulled with all my might. When my shoulders reached the hole, they lodged, and I was stuck. I dug my feet into the rocks and wiggled my way back into the passage, pulling my upper body through. Normally I'd be careful working my way out, since there's a 3-foot drop on the outside of the hole. This time I kicked with my legs and pulled with my arms, and plop, I dropped out of the tomb right into my shoulder. I tried to roll to soften the image, but I was unable to do anything more than just take that blow. Strangely, the pain was focused on my shoulder, apparently not affecting my already sore back. I rolled onto all fours, then slowly rose to my feet. The smell was much less intense outside the passage. I grabbed the glow stick and used it to find my helmet. I began to head for the webbing to climb while strapping my helmet. When I got to the webbing, I reached up to grab hold and recoiled to horror. In the glow of the glow stick, I could see for the first time the injuries to my arms. My forearms were covered with deep cuts and scrapes. Much of my arm was covered with blood. The wounds were not deep enough to bleed freely, but rather ooze the blood. In that brief moment, I stopped and noticed that there was silence in the cave. No sounds coming from the passage, and nothing from up ahead. Once again, the feeling of being alone returned, motivating me to proceed. Climbing up the little drop-off proved to be difficult with my condition. Having a glow stick as the only light source added to the challenge. Once on top, I scrambled to catch up with B. I was impressed with the speed of his ascent.
Although I did not mention any more of my physical condition during my exit, I was hurting. With every step I took, pain shot through my lower back and my neck. My arms were shredded. My shoulder had a nice gash in it. I honestly believed that were it not for the terror I felt at the time, I would not have the energy and the motivation to climb out. I ran on pure adrenaline. Unfortunately, the adrenaline surge was about to end.
I did not see or hear B until I reached the small area at the bottom of the drop. He was on a rope and climbing out as fast as he could. I could hear him moving quickly and breathing heavily. I called out to him, and his startled reaction told me he was nearly as tense as I was. He told me to get on the rope and start climbing. We both knew that it would be dangerous, and not something we would normally do, but this is different. I stood there, looking up at where the rope disappeared into the darkness above me. It danced around B as he made his way to safety. He was out of sight, but I knew he was close. I knew the rope was my lifeline to the outside, to light, to safety, and behind me was darkness, fear, the unknown. I have the fleeting thought of a movie scene where the actor had outwitted the monster and had reached the front door of the haunted house. Just as he reached for the knob, he hears a sound behind him and turns only to see. I slid the ghost stick into the cord on my helmet and reached for my harness. Then I thought I would let B get a little higher up while I pulled the rope up that was stretched down into the cave. That would make it easier to get out once we get to the top of the drop. I chose not to wind the rope around my arm since it was sore and bleeding, so I just pulled it into a pile on the floor. From above, I heard B warn me, "Rock!" and I ducked under the ledge as several small rocks landed on the floor near my feet. I quickly went back to pull the rope. I had about half of it, about 50 feet, when the rope hit a snag. It was solid. There was no way I was going to crawl back into it to release it, so I decided to just forget the rope and get my harness and get out of the cave. I quickly threw the harness around me and started to buckle it. Before I could secure it, I heard a strange noise at my feet. My pulse began to quicken. I looked down at the rope to discover to my horror that the rope was disappearing down into the darkness. Something was pulling the rope back into the cave! I let go of the harness and began clawing my way up the rope. The unbuckled harness fell to the floor. Fortunately, I held on to an ascender. At that moment, I could not think straight and began climbing out of the cave without being attached to the rope.
I've climbed out many times without using an ascended device, but I was always attached to the rope just in case.
I was climbing as fast as my battered body could haul me up. I was in a near panic state again and consequently was scraping, bumping, and gouging my arms and legs. As I climbed, I screamed to B that something was pulling the rope. He yelled back to hurry up. Luck was just with me in that I didn't slip and fall back down into the hole. If I had, I would have been bouncing several times against the sides of the cave before smashing onto the floor. The injuries would be fatal. Without the necessity of having to stop to slide the ascender up the rope, I made excellent time getting up. I could see rays of light above me, coming from the entrance to the cave. That told me exactly where I was in the cave. I caught up to be on the ledge before where a relay point was fixed. I told him to keep going. It will only take him a few minutes, but every second would be torture because I have to wait for him to get up. I watched the rope that we had just climbed up. I expect to see some creature from deep within the earth climb and make me its lunch. The rope moved around a bit, in rhythm with B's climbing, but did not appear to have any tension on it. As I stood there waiting for B, I kept watching the rope for signs of anything bizarre. I didn't know if my heart could take any more of the stress. I could not have been more wired. I tried to relax a bit, to make sure I was thinking rationally, but my poor brain had reached sensory overload. As B reached the top of the last climb, I got ready to climb onto my ascender and get my sorry ass out of there. It was then that I noticed that the rope began to tighten from below. I could feel the tension on the rope, but it was a steady tension, like someone was climbing up. Either way, I wanted out of there as fast as possible. I clipped on and scrambled up the rope. I haven't noticed, but B kept on moving towards the entrance. I got up the last few feet in a hurry. I just unclipped and kept on moving, leaving the rope behind. By the time I got to the entrance of the cave in daylight, B was almost up to where the rope was anchored. I wanted to get up so badly, I almost started to free climb without climbing the rope. I could see B almost up, so I clipped on and started up. I almost didn't make it up. I had just started when I nearly collapsed from exhaustion. I managed to recover enough to pull myself up the last few feet. As I climbed, I could hear the tension on the rope manifest itself by the stretching noise on the rope. I prayed the rope would not break with me attached to it. The second that I reached the top, I unclipped the ascender. I could see B kneeling down by the tree, so I limped over to him and collapsed. For the first time since I went through Floyd's tomb, we could see each other. We just stared. I knew I looked pretty bad, but didn't know that B was in such bad shape. He had cuts and scrapes on every exposed surface of his body. His face was pale, almost white. His mouth and his eyes were wide open. He was breathing heavily, almost gasping. The shock we shared at the other person's appearance was broken when we heard the rope around the tree stretch and the knot be tightened. I was frozen in place, overwhelmed with fright. It seemed to be transfixed on the knot. Then in one motion, he produced a pocket knife and began to work on the rope. It's amazing how a person's state of mind can alter the perception of time. Sure, it only took 4 or 5 seconds to sever the rope from the tree, but it seemed like an hour. When the rope was cut, the knot fell to the ground, while the end of the rope zipped across the rocks and over the edge of the cliff, the speed of it causing a humming noise as it went. As soon as the rope was cut, B let out a cry. He dropped the knife and fell backward. Watching the rope fly over the edge brought the feeling in the passage back to me. I got up and headed towards the truck. I noticed B was still laying there, wide-eyed, staring at the point the rope disappeared. I called to him, which seemed to break his trance. He got up and hurried away from the tree, the cave, the nightmare. Neither of us said a word on the way home.
It is now 4 days after our trip into the cave. It has taken me 4 days and dozens of attempts to get this entire experience written into my journal. Every time I started to write, I recall that horrible, terrible feeling I had and just couldn't write anymore. I felt compelled to continue so as to document the unbelievable events while all the details were fresh on my mind. I could still feel the pain, still smell the stench, still experience the terror. Even typing from my journal has taken hours. I would like to write more, but it'll have to wait. Even now, with several days between me and the event, I can't relax. I can barely concentrate. That's all for now. May 19th, 2001. It has been 3 weeks since our last visit to the cave. I want to update everyone as to my condition, my plans for the cave, and the events of the past few weeks. I apologize for not returning your phone calls. I've been getting all your messages. I just haven't felt up to calling back. Steve and Mark, thank you for your words of encouragement on my answering machine. I know you two are sincerely concerned for me. You're awesome friends. Mark, I know you've stopped by the house a few times, and I'm sorry I never answered the door. It really helped me just knowing you dropped by. Sis, I can hear the worry in your voice. I'm okay. Don't worry about me. Just take care of those nieces and nephews of mine. I figured if I can get this site updated, I can let everyone know at once about how I am doing. A lot has happened in the last 3 weeks, so I'll do my best to cover everything. I guess I should start with that last entry that I left off. It took several days to get that last journal entry written down. I was so shook up from the experience that I could do little else but sit around and ponder about what happened. Right now, I am on long-term medical leave from work. I tried to go to work several days after the event, but my boss sent me home. I couldn't concentrate, and I looked terrible. I even been to the doctor, but I couldn't tell him about the experience. I just told him I was under a lot of stress. Just recommended me rest and gave me a prescription to help me relax. Good drugs. When we left the cave, I was nearly in a state of shock. I could not think clearly, and I was having a difficult time trying to understand what just happened. I didn't eat, nor did I get any sleep. I was glad to have the presence of mind to write down my experience while it was still fresh in my mind. As I reread what I wrote, I feel like I accurately portrayed what happened in that cave that day. I wouldn't change anything I wrote. Even though it took 3 days to write it, when I finished writing in my journal, I felt much better. I guess it was kind of therapeutic. Unfortunately, it didn't last. In fact, it was after that things got really bad. B and I parted company after the trip. I didn't see him again until yesterday. I didn't even try to reach him, and he didn't try to get a hold of me. Nor did either of us try to connect to Joe. B just dropped me off after the trip, and I spent the next several days to myself in my house. I tried to eat, but I had no appetite. I was restless, but I couldn't find anything to do to take my mind off the experience. That's when I determined that I should write it down. As I mentioned, that helped me think a little clearer, and I seemed to be a little calmer, but that didn't last. I went to work the next day, but was sent home. The day after that, I had an overwhelming feeling of anxiety sink into my soul. I was depressed and confused, had no one I wanted to turn to for comfort. I was getting all kinds of phone calls from people, but I just let the answer machine take the calls. I even changed the message on the machine to let everyone know I was all right. I continued in this miserable state, eating and sleeping whenever I could manage until a week after the trip. Then things started to get a little strange. At first I was hearing sounds in the house that had no explanation. Footsteps, shuffling noises, creaking doors. You know, the type of horror movie fare. Only the sounds were not distinct. Though as I wasn't sure I heard what I thought I heard. I'd be eating or getting out of the shower and stop, thinking I heard something, but the sound would not repeat itself. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that it happened frequently, I couldn't be sure that there were noises in the first place. Either way, I was scared. It was as though I had been caught in a spider web for the last week. Feelings of anxiety, foreshadowing, tension filled my life. Then came hallucinations. I began seeing things in a manner similar to the sounds I was hearing. Just a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. When I would turn to look, nothing. I had been sleeping with the lights on in my room, but now I keep all the lights on in the house from before dusk till after dawn. When I started to see things on a regular basis, I purchased a gun. I got it from an ad in the paper, so I didn't have to wait for a permit. I went to the doctor, but didn't mention the details of my life. Just told him I couldn't have relaxed. I walked out of there with a prescription. Fortunately, my wounds and injuries were pretty much healed by this time. My back still hurts a little, but the prescription took care of that. When I was on the medication, I felt great. But I didn't want to walk around high the rest of my life, so I wound up only taking it at the end of a tough day. Unfortunately, the severity of the sightings increased, giving rise to a need for medication. The flashes in the corner of my eye continued, but then I began to see shapes and shadows. They would be outside my windows, usually at night. Still, I couldn't make out anything solid, so it was hard to pin down what I was seeing. Soon I began to close all my drapes and blinds so I could remove the possibilities of seeing something. Doing so did help in that respect, but my life was still a mess. My daily routine was mechanical and empty. I would sleep as long as I could, usually out of exhaustion. Then I would get cleaned up, try to eat something, lost a lot of weight, and so I tried to get as much as possible down me. Then I would exercise and nap a lot. I've only been out of the house a few times in the last 2 weeks. The store, the doctor, the gun purchase. I didn't watch much TV because I couldn't concentrate. I spent a lot of time on the internet, doing research on caves and cave myths. The only story I could find was the cave folklore about the Ho Dog. The Ho Dog is supposedly a creature that roams caves. 2 weeks after we went into that cave, and the week after I began hearing things, I began to have nightmares. Extremely lucid nightmares. No specific theme or reoccurring events. Plain terrifying. Sometimes I was in my house and someone was trying to get me. Only I couldn't run because I had no legs. Other times I was in a vat and someone was pouring some syrup-like liquid on me, filling this vat. I'd wake up in a panic. I would stay awake until exhaustion forced me to enter dreamland once again. A brutal routine. It continued for several days, and it reached a climax on the 6th day, yesterday. My dreams seemed so real that I have a hard time telling as if I was awake or not. I was beat, really drained of energy and spirit. I was going from the living room to my bedroom in the early evening when I looked down a hall and saw a dark figure towards the end. I thought it was a thief and began to back up slowly. It did move. As I was backing up, the lights flickered off and on. Every muscle was tense. I stopped to stare at the figure. Just then the phone rang. It startled me so bad I stumbled over a chair. When I got up, I wheeled around to look down the hall and nothing was there. I grabbed my keys and left the house. I felt compelled to get in the car and drive. My pulse pounded in my temples as I got in and started the car. I wanted to drive to Overlook Point to see the city lights. I didn't know why I needed to go there, but I knew I had to. The closer I got, the more urgent the feeling. When I arrived at the point, I saw something that at first startled me, but then caused me to be more relaxed than I had been in a long time. There was Joe. He was out of his car, standing, looking at the lights. We looked at each other. I could see from the tired look on his face that he'd been going through the same miserable trial that I have been experiencing. He could tell from the look on my face that we had shared some terrible experience. Our conversation was unbelievably brief. "You've been back," he began, even though he knew the answer. "Yes. We need to return." "Tomorrow good?" I asked. "Yeah, noon." He got in his car and I got in mine. I haven't even wanted to talk to him about his experience. Obviously, he didn't want to know mine. So I drove over to B's house. When he answered the door, I thought that B actually looked like he was doing fine, somewhat happy. But one look at me, his disposition changed. Our conversation was also succinct. "I ran into Joe and going back in tomorrow at noon." B looked dead serious, just nodded his head. I asked him if I could spend the night at his house. He eagerly let me in. I didn't notice until later, but every light in the house was turned on. He lent me his spare room. Help yourself. Thanks. I washed up in the bathroom. I took some medication and got the first decent sleep in a long time. I woke early this morning and came home to get ready for the trip. I thought I would send out this update so no one will wonder what's going on with me. I suspect that by the time most of you are reading this, I will be back home and will have a great story to tell. I promise that if you haven't heard from me by now, you will very shortly. It's now 10 a.m. on Saturday the 19th. We will be leaving for the cave in 2 hours. Preparing for this trip will be like no other trip I've been on. For the first time in my life, I will carry a gun into a cave. I'll also carry a knife, an extensive first aid kit, plenty of food and water, and a camera. I would take several sources of light and a pad of paper and pencil. I will have to take all of my climbing rope, since B lost his in the cave. I will carry a good length of rope with me on the other side of Floyd's tomb. It's the first time in 3 weeks I've heard any reference in Floyd's tomb. It sends me shivers up my spine just typing that. There are so many things I hope to accomplish this day. So many answers I hope to find in a tiny passage hidden from view. Reflecting on the events leading up to today leaves me feeling dizzy. Was this all a bad dream? Unfortunately, I'm wide awake. And still, in a few short hours, I might face my nightmare. The thought of having another person with me in the passage does nothing to alleviate the fear I feel. I almost chuckled as I ponder a childish notion that we will have to consider. Who will enter the tomb first? Who will lead the way into the dark unknown? Who will decide when to turn back? Foremost among the questions in my mind is, what about the video camera I left behind? Is it supposed to be able to record in complete darkness? I left the thing running, so what might happen? What might we find on that tape? Darker questions follow. What if that camera is gone, and if it got destroyed? Although it is difficult to put an exact name on my motivation, I think closure fits quite nicely. I need to find out a few things about this cave. The main thing, believe it or not, is to find the end of it. With all of the bizarre things I've witnessed these past few weeks, it would seem a bit trite to want, as a primary goal, to get to the end. But that is what I want. To be sure, I will be seeking other bits of knowledge along the way. If, however, I find the end of the main passage and an end to the passage hidden by the rock, I will be content to never return to the passage or the cave again. Ever. It would seem to me that crawling headfirst through that tight passage into the darkness is an unnatural thing. Just like crawling up to the side of a cliff for recreation, or jumping out of a perfectly good airplane and floating to the ground. We do these things to satisfy our hunger for adventure. This subconscious desire to conquer our own little Everest. As B is fond of saying, caving is the last opportunity for exploration for the person with modest means. True, just a short drive from just about anywhere in the country is a cave waiting to be explored. Even a cave well known amongst the general public can be approached by someone for the first time as an adventure, something new, something to overcome, because it's there. Many of you don't agree with my decision to pursue this cave. I know this from messages I received. I'm afraid I don't have a choice. If I ever to experience restful slumber, I must return. If I am to ever walk the halls of my own home in peace, I gotta return. If I am to ever exit the other world and into the subterranean world of a cave, I must now return. I no longer feel that I have a choice. I must return. For my family and friends who are reading this, I say be at peace. I will conquer this cave. Then I will return and update this website immediately. I will include any photos We take in the cave today, and if you stop by the house, I'll show you the video that I have. I expect to be home later tonight, or tomorrow at the latest. See all of you soon, with lots of answers. Love, Ted. That's the end of Ted's Caving Journal.